Now, this comes as experts from the University of Buffalo say encrypted messaging for military operations poses critical risks.
And to talk more about this right now, we're joined now by Kevin Cleary. He's a clinical assistant professor of management science and systems at UB. Kevin, thanks for joining us here. And of course, this is a matter that both sides of the aisle are talking about. Democrats, Republicans, the White House is talking about it. We don't want to politicize it or talk about the politics anymore. We're just talking factually here of what we know right now. What stands out to you?
So, what I want to be clear on is for starters, the app itself, Signal, did not suffer a breach or have any kind of a breakdown or anything like that. I think what we're kind of circling on here is due process and correct procedures were not followed, or seemingly were not followed, to use the correct Department of Defense systems for sensitive types of conversations. There's a lot of conversation about, was this information classified, was it not classified, and as I think we're going down a path of we're missing the boat on really what's going on here, which is an app like Signal will do a very good job scrambling information and encrypting it end to end if you and I were going to communicate on the phone. But what that does not necessarily protect is the security of the device itself, my device, your device. And so when we're having sensitive conversations on that, when we're using an app like Signal, that only protects one part of the conversation. And so for most Americans, that's not as big of a deal. But when we're talking about sensitive topics like this, even if they're just rooted in policy and not necessarily kinetic battlefield plans, we still need to pay attention to the fact that that's why there's actual blessed mandated systems to have these kinds of conversations with.
Kevin, you kind of went into it a little bit, but for anyone out there who don't really know what exactly Signal is, what is it? How does that encryption work?
Yeah, so Signal is a free app that's out there. It's almost on par with something like WhatsApp, and what it will do is it will do what we call end-to-end encryption. So we can have a cellular conversation, and as that information is transmitted, it's being scrambled up. So, if you and I are having a conversation, the middle then you can't see what's going on. And that serves a basic military need since classical times. And that's essentially what Signal does. Now, once that message lands back on the endpoint, it's decrypted, I'm then reading it, there's still security measures that need to happen. In fact, depending on the setting, depending on the place, I could even have a secured endpoint that I'm using. There's nothing saying somebody's not looking over my shoulder and then seeing what's going on. And so when we consider these sensitive communications, it's not just about the encryption. It's not just about the technology. There's a lot of things we need to consider to be able to have these kinds of conversations safely.
Are you suggesting at all that, given in modern times now, in terms of hacking and all the rest, that perhaps maybe the federal government shouldn't be having these types of conversations on this type of app?
Regardless of what the rules are or are not, regardless of if we actually tag this information as classified or not, the optics of it are not good right now. And so when we talk about apps like Signal, it's very easy to make mistakes in terms of who you send things to. Literally yesterday, I sent a message to somebody over Microsoft Teams that I did not mean to, just because their names were similar, right? And I think we've all had those instances where we text somebody or email somebody and we just autocorrect puts in a different name and it goes to somebody we don't mean to. And that's exactly what we saw play out in this circumstance. Mike Waltz we don't know why he chose what he chose, but that was an honest mistake that a lot of us make day in, day out. In this case, the level of the risk was much different than when I go to text somebody a picture of my cat or something like that. And so we need to really think about here the level of risk in terms of even the policy damage that potentially could be caused. There was some talk in terms of European allies and things like that. Even if kinetic war plans were not shared, even if the actual material attack was not impacted in some way, we still need to look at there are other impacts here with this.
Wonderful. Kevin Cleary with UB, thank you so much for sharing your insight and joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you.